Good morning. Good morning. Turn with me to Job chapter 38. I'll begin reading there in verse 1 in just a few minutes. We've been going through the story of Job. Job, you remember, was a righteous man that God was really proud of. And he asks the question to a rogue prosecutor in the heavenly court, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And the rogue prosecutor in the heavenly temple says to God, "Well, does Job fear God for nothing? You know, if you take away all the blessings, he'll curse you to your face. And so he doesn't really love you, God. He's just serving you and doing good things to get the good stuff that you provide for him. He's a mercenary." And so the whole poem of Job strikes out, proving that the rogue prosecutor, the accuser in heaven, is actually wrong, and that love for God is possible, even when God doesn't reward righteousness, even when He doesn't protect the righteous. And so the story proceeds with Job's friends trying to comfort Job in this difficult time that he ends up having. His kids are all killed at once. He loses the love of his wife. He loses his reputation in the community. He loses all his financial resources. And the friends come and say, basically, after a while, "Well, what did you do to deserve this, Job? Let's fix it. If we can figure out why you deserved all this bad stuff, then we can get things headed in a better direction." And of course, Job says, "Well, I haven't done anything out of the ordinary. I've had the same kinds of problems that I've always confessed, but I've really lived the best I could to serve God, and I don't know of anything that could have deserved all of this." And so that discussion fills up many of the pages of Job. Job finally gets to the point where he just has to have it out with God. I've got to understand. I wish I could have a day in court with Job. And so today, finally, we get to the climax of the story in chapter 38, where God decides that He is, in fact, going to answer Job and answer the problem of all of this suffering and this sense of meaninglessness that Job is dealing with. Chapter 38 and verse 1. "Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm that we saw that was coming last week. He said, 'Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, and I'll question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?' Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone?" You see, in the ancient cosmology, when you built a temple, you built a miniature of the whole world. And so the whole world has a foundation like a temple has a foundation. Okay? "And while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy," where were you, Job? Verse 8. "Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place?" See, the temple has a containment system that contains the chaos of the sea. There's a ceiling above which there is the waters of the firmament, you see. And the temple is built on these chaotic waters. And there are floodgates that control the floods. And when I said this, in verse 11, when I said, this is far, this far you may come and no farther to the floods, here is where your proud waves halt. Where were you, Job? When I put the sea within the container, the bronze sea out front, where were you when I contained the chaos of the oceans? Have you ever, verse 12, given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. When I was young and I read that passage, I struggled with it a lot. It seemed an awful lot like the movie Matilda to me. In the movie Matilda, there is an abusive father played by Danny DeVito. And he tells his little girl, the sweetest little girl you can imagine, Matilda, he just points his finger at her and he says, listen, you wiseacre, you wiseacre, I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think when most people read these words, that's the kind of thing that they tend to hear from God when He speaks to Job. Job, you're going to answer me, right? Where were you when I set the world on its foundations? Where were you when I did all these things? When I shut the doors of the chaotic sea behind bars? Where were you? You surely know that. And so God is kind of like, for many people, I think, pulling rank here. And of course, in a certain sense, that's true. But I think people hear it in a way that's like Danny DeVito saying to his little girl, I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm smart, you're dumb. So shut up and deal with it. Part of all of this, I think, is that we have been trained to think that the creation that God made in making all the stuff of the world is a creation of making stuff out of non-stuff. But in the Bible, the stuff already exists at the very beginning of the story. You know, from the very beginning, the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Over the chaos of the deep, God hovers over. And that's where the whole thing begins. In other words, we may be interested in the scientific existence of matter, but the Bible story is not, that's not where it's pointed at. The Bible story is interested in how God is going to shape the stuff so that life can thrive in the world. And we've got a problem. T-home is chaotic, formless, and empty. The deep, the surface of the ocean, doesn't follow God's way. And so we have this concept, I think, of creation being God saying, okay, let's make stuff. And then there's stuff. But then there's not any more stuff, right? Matter is matter. You don't make any more matter. We scientists know that. And so creation was over a long, long time ago in Genesis 1 or 2. Right? But the Bible talks about creation being ongoing. The Bible is always talking about how God is shaping the world. Jesus is making a New creation. Behold, the second coming is about God making all things new. So God isn't done with creation. God is continuously creating things and making things better, sustaining the world by His powerful Word. So God starts dividing a disordered creation into an orderly heavenly temple in Genesis chapter 1. Light is divided from darkness. Sea is divided from land. Waters above the ceiling of the temple, the firmament, from the world inside the temple where God takes His seat on a throne. And then in Genesis chapter 2, the heavenly temple and its surrounding garden starts percolating up from the surface of the ground on earth. And God does a copy of the heavenly temple on earth. The temple paradise, otherwise known as Eden. And Adam, humanity, is made as an image of God. He images God in the earthly temple as God sits on the throne in the heavenly one. And humanity is made in the image of God inside that temple compound, and humanity is to fill the whole earth, which is still a desert, a wilderness. Fill it, make it fruitful, and till it, and do all the things that would make creation habitable all around. And so God involves humanity and the world in His ongoing shaping of the world through His throne of rest. So the point of Job 38 is not just to say that humans are dumb, little, and wrong, but that while that certainly is true, that while we're small and not in a position to know everything or control all that much, God has always, from the beginning, controlled and constrained the sea. We might have wished that He had just done away with all the chaos and the mess of the world from the very beginning. We know that in the end, He's going to create a world where there is no more chaotic sea. We know that that's coming. But Job doesn't focus there. The speech of God in Job 38 is to say that God shut the doors on the sea. He put the chaos in a containment center, and He has kept the waves of chaos from just overwhelming everything. The point is that God is involved in staving off all of this chaos. Always has been. Now everybody gets 2 rounds of speeches in Job, and God's no exception. And so in chapter 40, we can pick up with the way this thing kind of continues. Like Sean, I'm dealing with chapters here, and y'all want me to be done in 30 minutes, so I'm selecting. Okay? In verse 15, look at the behemoth. Look at the behemoth, which I made, God says to Job, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar, the sinews of his thighs are close knit, his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs are like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God, yet his Maker can approach him with his sword. The hills bring him their produce, and all the wild animals play nearby. Under the lotus plant he lies, hidden among the reeds in the marsh. The lotuses conceal him in their shadow. The poplars by the stream surround him. And when the river rages, he's not alarmed. He is secure, though the Jordan should surge against his mouth. Can anyone capture him by the eyes, or trap him and pierce his nose? Well, in terms of an animal, what are we talking about? We're talking about a hippopotamus. We're talking about a hippo. And the image is, how many of you, God asks, can put an ox ring in a hippo and tame a hippopotamus? Have you ever tried to make a hippo a pet? Have you ever tried to put an ox ring in a hippo's nose? Think about the ring that would have to be, right? So the point is that God does tame that. Now we also know that the hippo, the behemoth, is also a mythical character for chaos in the ancient Near East. And so he's not just talking about a hippo, he's talking about very real spiritual powers lodged in the world that create havoc and chaos and great strength and uncontrollable kinds of stuff. Can you deal with all of that? Can you, Job, put an ox ring just kind of to show that ox where to go and make that hippo do what you want? Of course not. Of course not. The point is not merely that you can't, however. The point is that God, I can. And then in chapter 41 and verse 1, can you pull the Leviathan with a fish hook? You know? Now, Leviathan, what's that? Well, it's something. It's a sea monster of some kind, right? Maybe some unknown creature of the sea that is a symbol, once again, in Near Eastern religion. The Leviathan is that unmanageable wild beast of the sea that does all kinds of crazy things like stir up hurricanes or stir up, what are those earthquakes under the sea called? Make a tsunami wave. I mean, how many of you have just stood on the beach and watched a simple old thunderstorm roll in over the ocean? And the surging, enormous power of the sea. Yes? And each wave does something a little different, and it seems utterly mindless how the water actually kind of, there's no order to it. And so the Leviathan is that force in the world that is chaotic and resistant to good order. Can you pull in the Leviathan? Can you just can you pull in the Leviathan? Can you go fishing in the sea in the midst of a hurricane and make the thing, just pull it up on the beach and everything be calm? Can you put a cord through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Can you hook him with a hook and stick him on your stringer? Can you stick him on a stringer, can you, Job? Will he keep begging you for mercy? Is that what the tsunami does? Job, does the tsunami beg you for mercy? Will he speak to you with gentle words? Will he make an agreement with you? For you who take him as your slave for life, can you make a pet of him like a bird or put him on a leash for your girls? We're going to take some crazy dragon or Moby Dick and making him a pet for the girls, Aaron? Will traders barter for him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his hide with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again? Huh? Can you go whaling for this thing? Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse him. Who then is able to stand against me? Again, the point is not, Job, you're weak, I'm strong. The point is, Job, I'm strong enough to handle the enemies of human life. I'm big enough to handle Leviathan, even though you are not. And even though Leviathan raises its nasty head from time to time. You see, there are numbers of creation stories in the Bible. Psalm 74 is an important one, where God is not creating by speech, but God is creating by being in a battle against forces of chaos, and He slays a Leviathan, Psalm 74:14. Well, does any of this answer then, as we kind of bring it to a conclusion today, does any of this answer Job's protest? I mean, Job's protest against God is that God's rule and His administration of justice is unfair. All these bad things are happening to me, Job. All my kids are dead. My wife hates me, right? I've lost everything, and for what? And all these bad people are running around Dodge and thriving, and why is that? And Job says, I don't deserve what I'm getting. And if we want God to answer today, to answer that question as to why the bad things happen to good people, then God's not going to answer Job's question. But I think we need to tune our ears to how God is in fact answering Job's question, answering Job's legal complaint. Job's friends and Job have ideas about what justice is. Job has his own ideas about what's fair. But God here begins to provide another concept of justice, a justice that only makes sense when the business of creation is finished and when God has put these chaotic monsters to rest. Human beings, in other words, think they know what they mean by justice, but they really don't. Thomas Hobbes said that justice amounted to having an absolute sovereign who could restrain the war of all against all. Justice is what the king says it ought to be. Plato, of course, had something similar in mind, but his king was a philosopher king who would rule with great wisdom and philosophical acumen. The natural rights theorists said, no. Justice is about protecting people's rights to life, liberty, and property. But other natural rights theorists said, well, what happens when your natural rights to life, liberty, and property violate what I want for my life and my liberty and my property? How do we settle these rights claims? Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill thought they knew. They said, justice is all about maximizing the benefits for the most people. It's the greatest good for the greatest number. That's justice. But then, what Politburo gets to decide what's good? And, oh, by the way, what happens to minorities in that system? If it's for the greatest good for the greatest number? What if I'm not in the greatest number and I've got a huge investment in a little bit? Look what happens to minorities, right? We know what happens to minorities. Is that justice? And so these theories of justice, to where we think we know what justice is, they fall flat. They fall flat. In 1971, John Rawls, a famous liberal scholar in the United States, wrote a book on a theory of justice, and he said, justice is about distributing everything equally unless the unequal distribution of blessing makes everybody a little better. So it's okay if I have more than Aaron has, as long as what I'm having more makes Aaron better. It's okay if Aaron has more. If his more makes my less, okay, better, actually better too. And then somebody walks around and says, what if Aaron works 3 times as hard as you do? Shouldn't he get 3 times as much? Is equal? You do nothing, he works 1,000 hours a week and you work 0? Is that fair that you get the equal amount? Is that justice? And so human beings think they know what justice is. They think they know what's fair, but when they start to articulate what it is, they end up with these theories that just don't hold. And that's been happening for 6,000 years of human history. Usually, people are talking about punitive justice, people getting what they deserve, or distributive justice, God giving people what is best for them all, and it being fair between people. But what God here in this passage emphasizes is that there is something, and He is capable of it alone, something called creative justice. Creative justice. God is able to make it right. God is able to remake the world in order to make it right. God is in a battle with force fields of chaos, and His love puts limits on these forces, but His love also patiently bears with these forces in ways and for reasons we can't fully understand. But God has in the past, and He will continue and ultimately fix all the wrongs. God's creative power to bring life out of death, light out of darkness, God's creative capacity to restrain the senselessness of creation is the only thing that we can hope in. So today I want to say this. This is what I want you to get out of this. There are going to be things in your life that are not fair, that don't seem fair. However, you understand fairness. My grandmother's brother died as a toddler. My grandmother's son was killed by a drunk who had a seizure. And I lost the best coach and the person who understood me best in the world. Is it fair? I don't know what will happen to you in life, but all of us are going to face some things that will seem and actually be completely unfair. You know why? Because the forces of the sea, the forces of Behemoth, the forces of Leviathan, they are real. You may say they're just figurative language, but all figurative language points to something. And the something that they point to is real. Injustice and chaos, it's real. And when you experience that, I want you to remember 2 things. When the storm of life happens, remember it's still God who is speaking out of the midst of the whirlwind. Whatever idea of fairness you have, and whatever kind of fairness you're operating with in your head, this comes from the fact that you think that the universe ought to be fair, because there's a loving God who wants the world to be loving. If that weren't true, then why are you mad for getting the senselessness of anti-creation when there isn't anything, no meaning or order in the world anyway? Why would you be surprised that nothing makes sense in life when there's no God and no justice out there really? In other words, when you get mad about life not being fair, don't be so mad at God because God's mad with you. In fact, God's the only reason that you have a right to be mad. You get that? Where's the idea of fairness come from? If there is no God and there is no fairness, where do you get the idea that that life ought to be fair? Yeah? And so you're really mad about the very thing that God is mad about, and you're really upset because God's will is not being brought and made manifest in the world. The second thing I want you to remember is what my friend Alan said at my dad's funeral. God will make this right. God will make this right. When Jesus returns in power and glory, He's going to make everything right. This makes you confident, you see, in whatever you do, because you know that it's all going to turn out all right in the end. In the end, you know you and God in Jesus Christ are going to win. You're not ultimately going to get beat. So you don't ever have to worry about choking ever again, because you're going to win in Jesus Christ. You can go through your life with great confidence because you know that no matter how bad it gets, God holds all the trump cards. It'll make you also forgiving because there's no injustice, no matter how real, no matter how profound, that can cause you permanent loss. Why is your loss not permanent? Because God's going to make it right. How do we know? How was Job reassured that God was going to make it right? Because God says, at the very beginning, didn't I put floodgates to keep the utter chaos from just consuming the world? Why do the stars follow their courses? It's because I've set them on a firm foundation, and I've said this far and no farther from the sea. That's why. How is it that all of the life's accidents just don't overwhelm everything? It's because I've put a hog ring in Behemoth's nose, and I control that thing. Why is it that tsunamis don't just wipe everything out? It's because I can catch that thing and make it a pet and give it to Aaron's girls. That's who I am. That's who I am. And so this can give you a sense of great forgiveness and release, because nobody or nothing can ever ultimately take anything from you. God is going to make it right. And it will give you peace and joy and hope in the middle of chaos. For God has and continues to be able to put the resurgent sea behind its doors, to tame Behemoth and string up Leviathan. And one day sooner than many of us may expect, He's coming to make things right. And I'm ready. Aren't you? As we stand and sing, let's be ready.